John, you can get started.
Good morning and welcome to Florida International University. I'm John Stack, the founding dean of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. It's an honor to be here with you today to unveil the results of our 2020 FIU Cuba Poll. This is the longest running research project tracking the opinions of the Cuban American community in South Florida, and we are so proud to be able to produce this important scholarly work. The 2020 poll is the second Cuba poll since the election of President Trump in 2016. We have seen some interesting trends continue since the last poll, which was conducted in 2018. But I will let our research team tell you more about it. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge our partners at the university who have generously contributed to this work. The Office of the President, the Division of External Relations, Strategic Communications and Marketing, the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, the Cuban Research Institute, which first sponsored the FIU Cuba Poll back in 1991, and of course, the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, and our wonderful Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies, the primary sponsor of this year. It is our privilege to lead the way for more than 2 decades in capturing the pulse of the Cuban American community and their opinions on U.S.-Cuba relations. I also want to acknowledge the Ruth K. and Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series, which is co-sponsoring today's important event. I'd also like to thank, in particular, Amy Ellis and Pedro Boda for all of their work in producing the poll. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the 5th president of Florida International University, Dr. Mark B. Rosenberg. President Rosenberg was not able to be here with us today, so he recorded this brief message.
I'm Mark Rosenberg, president of FIU. I want to welcome you to this discussion about the 2020 Cuba Poll. We are so glad that you're joining us today. Our FIU has been conducting the Cuba Poll for almost 3 decades. And each time we canvass the community, we get an insightful and thought-provoking snapshot of Cuban American opinion here in South Florida. Today, you're going to hear from experts at our Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. They will dive deep into the Cuban American sentiment on the upcoming election, the U.S. embargo on Cuba, and a host of other issues. And as a political scientist myself, I'm always interested to see the results of the Cuba poll. This year is no exception. As a top public research institution at the heart of the largest Cuban American community, our FIU has a responsibility to study our own community and help make sense of changes in our world. With the 2020 Cuba poll, our researchers have once again done just that. And I'm confident that you will find today's conversation informative, enlightening, and worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Stack, for your steadfast support of the FIU Cuba Poll, as well as the mission and activities of the Cuban Research Institute at FIU. Let me say a few words about the FIU Cuba Poll by way of introduction. The FIU Cuba Poll, as you've heard, has become the most widely cited source of information on the changing attitudes of Cubans in Miami. I myself have often used the results of the poll in my research and teaching on the Cuban diaspora. From the beginning, Drs. Guillermo Grenier and Hugh Gladwin, faculty members in FIU's Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies, have directed the survey. This year, Dr. Xing Lai has joined as a co-principal investigator. The poll was designed to measure the views of Cuban Americans about US policy options toward Cuba, the consistency of some of the responses, as well as a shift in others, provides the most complete picture of Cuban American political attitudes over time. The FIU Cuba Poll is administered to a randomly selected sample of Cuban American residents of Miami-Dade County in Florida. The sample is generated from telephone exchanges using standard random digit dialing procedures that ensure that each phone number has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample. Interviews are conducted with respondents who have both landline phones as well as cell phones. The large size of the sample allows for a complete demographic analysis of the Cuban American population in Miami-Dade County. Bilingual interviewers conduct a survey in both English and Spanish. Let me now briefly introduce you to the two co-authors of the 2020 FIU Cuba Poll. Dr. Guillermo Grenier is Professor of Sociology and Chair of the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies at FIU, where I also teach. Born in Havana, he is one of the founders of the Miami School of Social Analysis and has published 7 books and dozens of articles on labor, migration, immigrant incorporation, and Cuban American ideological profiles. His books include A History of Little Havana, published with Corina Mobius in 2015. This Land is Our Land, Newcomers and Established Residents in Miami, with Alex Tepic, Max Castro, and Marvin Dunn, published in 2003. And The Legacy of Exile, Cubans in the United States, with Lisandro Perez, published in 2002, which has become something of a classic in the field. Grenier holds a PhD in sociology and an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Dr. Xing Lai is Associate Professor of Sociology in the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies at FIU, where he teaches quantitative methods and other courses in sociology. He earned his PhD in sociology at the University of Michigan. He received graduate training at the Population Studies Center and Survey Research Center of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. His academic interests include Chinese Muslims, development, demography, and social stratification. He has published peer-reviewed articles in Social Science Research, Chinese Sociological Review, Chinese Journal of Sociology, Research in the Sociology of Work, and Natural Hazards, among other academic journals. His current work focuses on the Muslim population in China. He analyzes census and survey data to examine the group's heterogeneity and its relations with the Han majority, the Chinese state, and the Islamic world. Before proceeding, I would like to underline that the full report and PowerPoint presentation of the 2020 FIU Cuba Poll are now available on the website of the Cuban Research Institute. The webpage is cri.fiu.edu/research. I also want to note that you can submit your questions for our speakers using the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. After the presentation, I will try to ask as many of your questions as possible and perhaps group them according to the common themes. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Guillermo Grenier.
Thank you, Jorge. I will now set up the PowerPoint before I start thanking everybody and their dog for being here. All right, let's see. Can we share this screen? How's that look? We good?
You're good.
Okay, great. Never know. I have to. This is a strange experience, but at least now I can knock off my my bucket list. I can scratch off delivering the Cuba Poll during a pandemic. So I'm glad you're all here, and I'm looking forward to presenting this because it's again, all our Cuba polls are a labor of love in a way, because I've been very fortunate to work with colleagues like Dr. Lai and Hugh Gladwin for many, many years, who also shared my passion for trying to find out, or our curiosity, what's going on is really what drives this. And I hope that we'll answer some questions in the process. Dr. Stack, for some reason, I'm not getting a, oh, I know. Dr. Stack thanked all of the important people, and I'm going to thank him again for his unequivocal and always steady support for our work in the Cuba Poll. The Stephen J. Green School of Public Affairs has supported us from the very beginning, as have all the other sponsors. I would like to have a shout out specifically to Amy Ellis and Alexander Pacharik, who in their meticulous editorial assistance have made me very aware of how much I need to improve in that regard. We were catching typos until the very last moment here, Amy and I. So thank you very much. Your work has been invaluable in making this presentation of the quality that I hope you all will agree it is. Jorge, Dr. Duani described the Cuba Poll methodology very thoroughly, so I will go through, I will skip that and go ahead. We've been doing this for many years. This is the 14th rendition. All of the methodology has been consistent. We do probability sampling, and we try to make it as reflective of the population as possible. And I think in this case, I will emphasize how good our sample is in as we go along. First off, let me give you an idea of what you're going to be looking at, because you're going to be looking at slides that have a lot of information on them, but there's a pattern to the madness. Each slide will present a question. The responses to that question will be broken down by 4 categories. One, you'll see the total of the entire general population's response. Then you'll see the breakdown by age, by migration group, splitting the migration group before 1995 and post 1995, and nativity, whether the respondent was born outside of Cuba. Then you'll see voter registration or no party affiliation. So that breakdown is the pattern that all slides will follow. This is an example that I've chosen to show you as an example of the close relative significant others living in Cuba. You'll see in the top 2 rows are the responses by the general population. Now the top row, the very top one that says total with decays, we want to be very transparent about all of our research. So there we're looking at the responses of the general population, including those that did not answer or it said don't know. We put it there, so FYI, but the reports that an analytical row is the one under that. That's the one we actually have people who know, who respond to a question. So that's the total, those top 2 rows reflect the general population. Then we break it down by age. You see the age categories. Then we break it down by migration cohort. And then we break it down by party registration and non-citizens. The bottom row there are the non-citizens. Now, you'll notice in party registration, there's a parentheses right after that that says that indicate or will. We did our poll before the deadline to register. And when folks insisted they were going to register before the deadline, we took them at their word and included them as registered in that party. We asked them where they were going, what party they were going to register in. And so we included them in the analysis. The other thing I want you to look at in that example slide is the color scheme. We've maintained a global color scheme where blue reflects some kind of abstraction of engagement. That is, some questions are more geared towards you want to engage with Cuba or you want to isolate Cuba. Blue is always more engagement oriented, the answers, and red is more isolationist oriented as the group answers. And the last thing I want you to look at in this slide, and then I'll go on, is the 50% mark. This 50% mark is very important to keep your eye on, because at that point, when you see the red overwhelming that, or the red or the blue overwhelming that, you can, at a glance, you can see that a majority of the population supports that initiative has answered that question in the affirmative or the negative. You'll see the codes on the top. For example, right here, you see that non-Cuba born respondents, Cuban Americans, or Cubans born in third countries, don't have significant others on the island, right? So that's an immediate takeaway from that, where most other people do. Now, let's go on. Another pattern, so that's how the information is being laid out for you. The way the information clusters is also something that I want to mention up front, because is instructive in the way that you look at each slide. You'll notice that there's a pattern to the answers, to the cohorts, to the way that people, that our groups cluster together. Older respondents, pre-1995 migrants, and registered Republicans are more likely to be supportive of isolationist policies. So supportive, for another word, you know, in entre comillas, the hard line. That's the cluster of that you'll notice come up repeatedly in my presentation. Younger respondents, Cuban Americans born outside the United States, born outside of Cuba, excuse me, and registered Democrats are more supportive of engagement policies. No surprise there, but I just wanted to make sure that when you look at these, the color scheme and the answers, you become aware of that, because I won't be pointing it out consistently. Non-citizens, the majority of whom are recent arrivals, they fluctuate. They go back and forth, but they generally are supportive of engagement policies as well. Okay, so let's contextualize quickly what we're looking at when we talk about the Cuban American population in South Florida. As you know, in terms of national numbers, ni pinchamos ni cortamos, right? We're not a large number at the national level. We come into our own the closer home we get, right? So in Florida, we're 7% of the over 7% of the population. In Miami-Dade County, we're the largest ethnic bloc in the county. Even if you group together other ethnicities like all Hispanics, which include Venezuelans, Hondurans, Argentinians, and whatever, and then everybody else, non-Hispanic, which include African American, Russians. So we clearly become significant in Miami-Dade County. Now our significance expands to the state when we have presidential elections, because we play at the state, our numbers count as state numbers. Now this is the slide that shows you how good our sample is. This is kind of us tooting our horns, lest our horns go untooted. In the left-hand side, you see categories that then we analyze in the survey, in the questionnaire. In the center, you see the column of the Census Bureau's American Community Surveys percentage of those categories. And you'll see the number on the right, which is our sample poll weighted by the population numbers. Very similar, those numbers. You'll notice it, and that means that we have a good poll here. That means we have a representative probability sample, which you can take to the bank if that's where you're headed. This is an estimated number of Cuban registered voters. Now, maybe I should put this slide at the end when we give you a percentage of how many people are going to vote and all that. But nevertheless, like Jorge said, this is all going to be up on the CRI website, or is up on the CRI website. This estimate is drawn from actual hard numbers given by the Division of Elections and the American Community Surveys on the population structure of the Cuban American population. And then we estimate, based on our sampling, our polling sample, how many Cubans are registered. Cubans are not pulled out of the Hispanic numbers at the state level or the county level, but we estimate given our polling. So you can see that clearly in the Republican Party, and go all the way to the right, Miami-Dade County, you can see that the Cubans comprise the large majority of all Hispanic Republicans in that county. 294,000 Hispanic Republicans, 253,000 of those are Cubans. So that is something for your referencing once you go to Jorge's website and download it. This is coming down into Miami-Dade County territory. Cuban registrations, about 53% Republican, clearly the largest Republican bloc in the county. Hispanics, 10%, non-Hispanics, 17%. The Republican Party's base in Miami-Dade County, Donald Trump's base in Miami-Dade County, is within, it's in the Cuban American population. So let's talk about the embargo, why don't we? You know, let's just jump right in, de barriga, belly flop right into the topic of the embargo. Every year, since we've been doing the poll, every poll year, we ask Cubans how effective they think the embargo has been. That is how well has it worked? Now, we don't define or try to get from them what it means if it were to work. Would it be regime change? Would it be I mean, I don't know. We don't know. I don't even go there. But every year, Cubans agree that according to their own definition of what would be a working embargo, the embargo does not work. And this year is no exception. I'm going to minimize this window up here. There's no exception. 71% recognize that the embargo has not worked, or at least they express that opinion. Now, this year, we see a trend that started in 2018 when we asked them if they are willing to, for some reason, now it's not moving it. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, but my slides are not sliding. Okay, there we go. How well an embargo has worked. Now we asked them, right after that question, we have the same sequencing of questions since going back all the way to 1991. Given what you said about the embargo not working, given what you said about the embargo working, we asked them, do you support or not the continuation of the embargo? The trend for increasing support we picked it up last poll year, 2018, and it was and it's repeated this year. This year, if you include the don't knows in the answers, you get 54% of the population supporting embargo. If you take out the don't knows, if you actually analyze the people that have opinions, which is usually what we do, 60% of the Cuban American population in Miami-Dade County is in support of continuing the embargo. And you can see right up and down that 50 mark line that support either mostly favor the policy of the embargo or strongly favors, goes across all categories except not Cuba-born and Democrats. Now, independents are closer to the 50% line than other groups, but nevertheless, you see there's strong support for maintaining the embargo in this climate right now, politically in Miami-Dade County. Now, if you break the population up differently, you see where the energy for that, a lot of the energy for that opinion comes from. If you look at pre-1995 immigrants and you group them together and you look at all other Cubans, that is post-1995 and born outside the island, then you see that it's the pre-1995 folks that feel strongest about maintaining the embargo. All others are closer to having a split population given the 3% margin of error. Nevertheless, there's support, right, across the board, but less so among others that post-1995 and other Cubans. Now, this is important just because they're not making any more of us that came before 1995. The growth is in the folks that are coming since then, of course, and folks that are being born outside of the island. Now here's a pattern that you will, Dr. Lai and I are exploring with a lot of other data that shows you the decline in support for the embargo during the Obama years specifically, and then the increase in support for the embargo during since Trump came into office, and the inverse pattern on diplomatic relations, where you have an increased support for diplomatic relations during the Obama years, and a decline now in support for the diplomatic relations and then now they're both meeting around the 59% mark, 59-60% mark. Now, if you stretch those lines back out, you see that pattern kind of maintain itself, reproduce itself during the Bush years. There was a leveling off of support for the embargo, and then during the Clinton years, there was a decrease in support for the embargo. But it nevertheless shows us how much Cubans, we are part of this world that's called American politics, and we respond to leadership on issues dear to us. Other economic relationships. Now, like I said, there is great support for maintaining dramatic support, one would say, for maintaining the embargo, but there's equally high support, strong support for suspending the sanctions of the embargo while this COVID-19 pandemic is going on. So this is a sensibility that is widespread in the community. You can see the 50% mark, and it's all blue there, except for some inexplicable reason, non-citizens, the most recent arrivals. But you can see there's a broad band of support to suspend something that they, for the long run, support. That is, they support the embargo into the future, but hey, now we're dealing with a crisis, and we would support reducing those sanctions due to this crisis. A couple of things, a couple of items that we always ask about is selling of food, and it always gets a very supportive audience selling food to Cuba. And here again, you can see that only Republicans, and before 1995, respondents are even kind of edging close to that line, the 50% line. Selling medicine to Cuba, the same, even more support. Even the Republicans and pre-95 arrivals pull back on that, as well as the older populations that usually cluster together. Continuation of cruise ship operations. The majority of the population does not agree with the continuation of cruise ship operations on the island. You have 42% minority support for the resumption of the cruise ships. So you can see that 50% line that only the non-Cuban born and the Democrats are and the younger Cuban Americans of 1839 are supportive of resuming cruise operations to the island. Some other general policy approaches, we asked right out in an elegant way, but we asked them whether they felt that the Cuba posed a threat to American vital interests. And 54% said no. In the population at large, you can see that the oldest cohort, as well as the pre-95 and the Republicans, are to the right of that 50% line. That is, a majority of them think that Cuba does pose a threat to vital interests of the United States, but most of the other groupings of the populations does not. Then we asked two general questions regarding what the general approach of the U.S. government should be towards Cuba. We asked them, in this case, would you support, do you think the U.S. government should emphasize policies that put maximum pressure on the Cuban government to promote regime change? And we use regime change as in the wording. And there you can see that line wasn't long enough for some folks. There is a strong support for this stick approach to foreign policy, right? The maximum pressure on the government. But as we have seen repeatedly in our polling, The Cubans want change. The Cuban Americans want change. We're willing to give antagonism a chance, but we're also willing to give peace a chance, as it were. When we ask them about policies, should the government emphasize policies as well that are directed specifically at improving the economic well-being of the Cuban people, there you can see overwhelming support as well for that approach. So it seems to me that the leadership in Washington does have the support of the Cuban American population to use a mixture of policies towards the island that put pressures on the government as well as improve directly the well-being of the Cuban people, and massive support for both of those general types of policy approaches. Diplomatic relations, it's gone down somewhat from the Obama year support, but nevertheless, there's a 58% support for diplomatic relations, and you can see only the usual cohorts of Republicans, pre-95 and older populations are the ones that edge closer to that 50% or across the line. Do you agree with the suspension of issuing of visas at the embassy in Havana? Strong agreement is in the minority. Somewhat agreement is in the minority. There's strong support, in other words. It's cut to the chase to reinstate that issuing of visas at the embassy of Havana. They oppose the suspension of the service majoritarily, except for pre-95 and Republicans. So you can see that there's strong support for resuming consular services and visas activity at the embassy in Havana. Would you reinstate wet foot, dry foot policy? We have a split decision on that. I mean, I say split decision because even though 47% support reinstatement and 53 oppose reinstatement, that is so steady right down all our divisions of our population that it's really a divided community on that concern, whether to reinstate wet foot, dry foot, or leave as is the policy. Support for suspension of family reunification parole program. Very little support for suspending the program. Again, only the oldest of the old and the pre-95 folks and Republicans are in support of suspending the family reunification program. The rest of the general population is 60% in favor of reinstating the program, and the other groups are as well oppose the suspension of the program. Unrestricted travel. This for the first time went down below 50%. It's 47% support unrestricted travel for all Americans. 53% oppose unrestricted travel. Again, young Cubans, the pre-1995 and Republicans are the most adamant in that regard. The independents weighed in on that one, and they also are in support of unrestricted travel. Sending remittances, about 50% of the population, 48% sends remittances. That number grows every year because we get new arrivals that have family there, that have still lives in Cuba. So that number goes up regularly. And of course, the folks that you would imagine not having family in Cuba are the ones that don't send remittances. This is a straight up question. Only one person decided not to answer that. Have you traveled to Cuba? Yes, traveling is increasing. We know this. 50% of the population, over 50%, has traveled to Cuba now, including Republicans, including even 28% of Cubans not born on the island have traveled. That's the highest number that we've had in that category in a while. So folks were, when traveling was possible, were taking advantage of that possibility. Even though there is diminished support for generalized travel to Cuba, Cuban Americans still want to get to all parts of the island when they need to go to the island, evidently, because there's strong support for reestablishing services, airline services to all regions of Cuba, not just to Havana. And that goes across all of our categories. National policies. Now, in these questions, there are 3 slides like this. We divide the importance of national policies by age, migration, voter preference. What each slide shows you is how the respondents evaluated specific specific policy issues independently on a 1 through 5 scale. We actually asked them, here's some important issues on a scale of 1 through 5, where the larger number means greater importance. Which number would you assign to the importance of? And then we talk about economy, healthcare, race, immigration, China policies, Cuba policies. We tried to keep it big item things that have gotten a lot of press over the last couple of years. The left-hand side of your screen there shows the total. That's not going to change as I go through these slides, because that is the total of all of the population. And there you see that Cuban Americans, like a lot of folks in the country, consider economy and healthcare to be 1 and 2 in importance in their lives, right? If you notice, the green bar on the left is Cuba policy, is dead last. It got beaten out by China by 1/10 of a decimal point. So you can see that in the general population, Cubans are not that different from folks in Ohio who's got economy and healthcare as being very, very important when looked at 1 by 1. Now, in this case, age is what we're looking at there. And you can see the older population, the healthcare is more important. And other than that, you can see healthcare and economy, 1 and 1, sometimes switching 1 and 2, switching positions. Cuba is always dead last, except in some situations. In this case, the oldest populations consider Cuba, policy towards Cuba to be next to last. It's more important than China, to the viejitos, okay? What am I talking about? I'm getting there. Migration wave and nativity on these specific issues, healthcare, economy, 1 and 2. Cuba, except for the migrants that have come since 1995, is last among non-Cuban born and those before 1995. So you have the salience of Cuba next to last among the groups that came since 1995. Voter registration, again, economy, healthcare. For Democrats is healthcare, economy. For non-citizens, is a dead heat. Economy and healthcare is all one for them. You got a job or you don't get healthcare. So the Cuba policies there, the non-citizens, the most recent arrivals, see that as an important. It's still next to last, but it's important. All the others put Cuba policy as last. So the memo says Cuban Americans, when we talk about Cuba, they'll respond about Cuba, but they have other things on their mind as well, folks, and I think we should recognize that. Support for President Trump's handling of key national issues. There's a lot of red in these next few slides, folks. There's immigration, strong support for Trump's handling of the immigration issue in the United States, except for non-Cuba borns. They're more critical, they're 50-50. And of course, the loyal opposition, the Democrats, are, I don't think that Trump has handled immigration very well. Healthcare. This is an interesting concept, healthcare, that Trump has handled, and it's a large support. Now, somewhat support is stronger than strong support, but still in the population at large, you have a 67% of respondents express support for the president's approach on healthcare, except of the non-Cuba born and the Democrats. Race relations, a little more mixed reviews, but still 55%, the majority of Cuban Americans think that Trump handling of race relations issues in the United States is worthy to receive of their support, and they have given it to him. The younger people, the younger respondents, 18 to 39, the youngest group, as well as the non-Cuba born group, which of course overlaps with youngest to some degree, and Democrats, and in this case, the independents weighed in as not supporting Trump's handling of race relations in the country. Nationwide protests, similar mixed reviews. I think they're associated one with the other very closely. You have the strong support, 55% of all the respondents support, but then you have 53% of the youngest not supporting. So you have, again, the younger populations, the Cuban not born on the island, the Democrats and the independents in this case, not on the Trump bandwagon on national protest handling. Cuba policy. 66% of Cuban Americans in South Florida support the president's handling of Cuba policy. The dissenting voices, where they come from, not Cuba-born Cuban Americans and Democrats. The independents approach that 50% mark, but do not cross it. China policy, it's the big policy. It's been economic, it's been associated with healthcare, it's a big front burner issue. Cubans have supported the president on this unequivocally. The only opposition to the Trump's handling of China policy comes from the Democrats. COVID-19, a policy initiative, the way he's handled it has been strongly criticized by a variety of voices throughout the world and the country, not Cuban Americans in general. 65% support the way Trump has handled the COVID-19 crisis, except for the non-Cuba born Cubans, the independents approaching 50%, and the Democrats. The economy, everybody's in on Trump's economy. This was done during the pandemic, so I don't know whether we're bracketing the elevator ride down that we're experiencing now or what, but we clearly are supporting the Trump economy. Even Democrats, 46% of Democrats support the Trump economy. So that's clearly a check mark on his record. Now let's look at the big political issues, and we're heading down the home stretch here, literally to the horse race question. We asked Cubans to put our respondents, Cuban Americans, to put their political views on a 1 to 7 points scale, most conservative, most liberal, and Cubans themselves identify themselves as pretty conservative. Only Democrats are out beyond the halfway point there, and new arrivals, they haven't quite been socialized into the Miami environment yet, are close behind the Democrats. So Cubans are, no surprise here, a conservative population, and they recognize themselves as such. Citizenship. There's a lot written about how quickly and frequently and the numbers of Cubans becoming citizens being very high. Our sample shows that it's been pretty consistent throughout the years. Only 13% of the entire population are not citizens. And of course, the newest arrivals are the least likely to be citizens. So only folks from 2015 to the present. 2015 to the present cannot be citizens yet anyway. So you have that consistency there. Now, registered voters, citizens by party registration. So if you're a citizen, you can register to vote. 53% I've mentioned before are Republicans, 24 no party affiliation, and 23% Democrats. Now, if you look at this picture, I can say, what's wrong with this picture, or what jumps out to you from this picture? And I know what jumps out at me, because we have been for years, during the Obama administration, I think the next slide will show you this, there was a decline in membership in the Republican Party. What jumps out at me here is that, yes, there was a decline between what jumps out at me here, I'll just tell you, is the 76% of new arrivals 2010 to 2015 that are signing up Republican. That's where the Republican Party, the growth in the Republican Party evidently has a root in new arrivals coming in and signing up Republicans. So there's new blood coming into the party from new arrival Cubans. And I mean, again, like I say, I said we're not making more of the old guard. Well, we are making more of this guard. So I think the Republican Party probably is going to be replenished to some degree by new arrival Cubans. Now you can see that born in the U.S. and born in other countries are not majoritarily Republican. They're mostly either Democrat or independent, no party affiliation. But clearly the new arrivals from Cuba are finding succor in the Republican Party in Miami-Dade County. Party affiliation over time, this is what I was talking about. You can see a decline right before Obama came in, and then there's a 68% Republican, then there's a decline. And when Trump came into the White House, it's begun to increase again, 51% in the last poll, 53% in this poll. So there's a rejuvenation of the Republican Party among Cuban Americans in Miami-Dade County. Now we have a very excited electorate, folks. These folks definitely want to work, definitely want to vote. 90% of the entire population wants to vote, eager to vote. Only the youngest group, which is not too surprising, 18 to 39, are more, they show maybe 11% might show up, but still 85% of them, the young group, says they're definitely going to vote. So there's an excitement in voting. And you only get excited in voting when you know who you're going to vote for, right? And who are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for Donald Trump. 59% of the folks that the registered voters that responded to who you're going to vote for, the election were held in summer. 59% said Donald Trump. I don't know if anything will change those votes, but it seems to me that a Trump vote is a Trump vote is a Trump vote. Now, Biden is at 25%, and there's a 10% undecided, which I would probably are. If you're undecided in this election climate, you're definitely undecided. So I think those folks are still in play. Now, you can see that Trump has support throughout. Hell, 15% of Democrats are going to vote for Trump. So you have the ability to entice Cuban Americans to vote to Trump. It's not that surprising if you're a Republican, but even some Democrats are voting for him. It's really impressive in Miami-Dade County. Now, I know I should end there. I know I should just say, okay, this is the end of this presentation, the horse race, but we did ask two questions because we wanted to find out how the COVID pandemic has had an impact, or if it has had an impact in our community, to what degree. There were general questions. We had a lot more questions, but you can tell this is a pretty long survey as it is. And we have incredible responses, because when Cubans start talking about Cuba, they don't stop. So 80-some% of the people we called that actually said that they were Cuban at the beginning of the first question answered all of them. So it's an amazing return rate. Nevertheless, we had to cut our response. We had to somehow trim the questionnaire. So we had more COVID questions, but we settled on two. One is by asking, we asked health impact of COVID and financial impact of COVID. scaling up from very badly affected to not at all affected. Bright green is not at all affected. Red, obviously, very badly affected. And on the health dimension, you can see that the younger Cuban Americans, not born in Cuba, were the most affected by, maybe because they're dumbasses and they go party on the beach, or maybe because they have to work and they're out in the street all the time. So we have an impact on a community that has not yet been analyzed or been scrutinized to any degree, but you can see that it's significant among many of the groups. The not born Cubans, 7% have been very badly, not born in Cuba, 7%. The young 18 to 39, 9%, very badly affected. Now, when we ask them about financial effects of COVID, then the effect is way broader. That green line, the bright green, not affected at all, is smaller when we ask about financial situations, because almost everybody's been affected by it, especially the non-citizens that are probably trying to hustle up their work in the service sector that has been dramatically impacted by COVID. The post-1995 that we know work more jobs, they're not as well off as the pre-1995 group, so they're more active in the workforce. So you can see that financially it's had a dramatic impact. We have between the slightly affected goes past 50% line, but somewhat affected approaches the 50% line. So we have a deeply impacted community that I think needs to be explored more closly. Quick takeaways: the community is divided on how to deal with Cuba. I've had that line, I think, in every single Cuba poll from the beginning. There is an increasing support in this poll for isolationist policies reinitiated by the Trump administration, and for the continuation of the embargo. Those are the things that are jump out immediately on policy approaches. There is majority support, though, for some engagement policies, either their resumptions or their continuations, like airline travel throughout the island, selling food and medicine, maintaining diplomatic relations. So there are some engagement policies that maintain a majority support, but that support is muted. Trump is on track to receive approximately 60% of the Cuban American vote in November, and his approval rating is high of his handling of key national issues. Now, I will say that although we look at it and go, wow, Cubans are so supportive of Trump's and these key issues, if you look at the last Gallup poll, and you look at the national approval ratings for Trump among Republicans, it's 90%. So Cubans in that sense are moderately in support of Trump, since there is not 90% support for any one of his policies. Maybe the economy, would have to look back more closely at it. So anyway, within within the framework of Republicans, Cubans are as supportive of Trump as any other. So all Republicans throughout the country seem to be. And the Republican Party here in Miami-Dade County is receiving an infusion of new energy from the most recently arrived Cuban Americans. That is, to me, a very interesting finding, something that Otaola can talk about at some point, maybe in response to the poll, and something that it could have reverberations throughout the political life of Cuban Americans in Dade County for a long time to come, if it's maintained. Okay, so that's the story, Morning Glory. You can go to the cri.fiu.edu website and get the report, as well as these PowerPoint presentations. And now I'll turn it back over to Dr. Duane.
Thank you, Guillermo, for your detailed and thought-provoking presentation. And now we will turn to some of the questions posed by our audience. We have received, I think, 10 to 11 questions right now, and I've been looking at them, trying to group them together by topic. So And of course, now we want to invite Professor Lai as well to participate if he so chooses. So one question that I think would be useful to address is by Carlos Rodriguez, and the question is, did you ask the race of the respondents? And if so, are the data broken out by race?
We did ask the race. As a matter of fact, we asked them to identify their own race. If you notice back at the very beginning of my presentation, there was a chart on the census and comparing the census numbers to our numbers. And we have more non-white respondents than the census has, just because the primary reason for that is that we let the respondents self-identify. So we have mestizos, we have mulattos, we have Chinese, we have a variety of ethnicities that the census would just clutter up into one category. So yes, we have, the answer is yes, we have those data. We did not for the report or the presentation break it out by race, but I'd be glad to, upon request, do that. It's information easily accessible. Both Dr. Lai and I thought it was very interesting that we got such a high percentage of non-whites. So yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue with a couple of questions that have to do with some of the specific data points in your presentation. The next one is by Victor Maruri, and he wants to know whether only 19% of poll takers are born in the US. And then he asks a second follow-up question is that, isn't that underrepresenting the actual population?
What was the first part of the question?
What percentage of the survey respondents were born in the US? I think you put them all together as not Cuba born, right?
Yeah, there's only, no, in the population in general, Dr. Lai can weigh in on this, but there's 19 in the United States of America. Oh, no, actually in Miami-Dade County, because we have the information in Miami-Dade County narrowed down to that. 19% of the population of Cuban Americans, according to the census, is born in the United States. We have 19.1, exactly. The census says 19.1 is born in the United States. We have 19.5, so we're really close so we don't underestimate, if anything, we overestimate a little bit. The census figure also has 1.6 Cuban Americans living in Miami-Dade County, born in other countries that have migrated to the United States. We have 1.5. So no, we're kind of right on the money on that. I hang out with students all the time, and I'm always amazed at how, I always think we underestimate the numbers, but no, the census, according to the census, 19.1% of Cuban Americans are born in the United States in Miami-Dade County. Our sample has them at 19.5. So it's kind of right on the money, as much as you can get on a sample, honestly.
I wonder if Dr. Lai wants to add something else? Guess not.
You're muted. Oh, no. Okay. All right. No, it's good.
Okay. So, yes.
I have nothing much to add. Actually, the numbers the percentage presented in table 1 of the report says what just Guillermo said. What I want to add is actually that's weighted percentages, but even for unweighted percentages, we're very close to the population distribution in terms of nativity and the cohort distribution.
Thank you. So another sort of data related question has to do with the percentage and the number of Cubans in the Miami-Dade population. And this is asked by Leila Macor.
The percentage of Cubans in the population?
Yes, that's her question.
Well, let's see. It's 36%, 36.3.
And in terms of real numbers, that would mean how many?
I don't know. Divide, multiply. 36%, 0.3 of the population of Miami-Dade County is 1.5 million. So do the numbers.
Okay, and that's not the actual number of voters, it's the actual number of people residing in Miami-Dade.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
actually we had people, right, Ching?
Yeah, in terms of numbers, the population numbers in Miami-Dade County, our estimation is not based on our poll. The estimation is based on the American Community Survey, which is a huge data set. What we used is the 5-year sample, cumulative sample, aggregating from data from 2004 and 2018. At the vintage point, what it represents is a 2018 population. So the MDC Cubans add up to a little bit less than 1 million, very close to 1 million in MDC, accounting for 36.3% of the MDC population.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So it's around 1 million.
Okay. Another data-related question is by Maria Carla Chicuen, who wants to know what percentage of the 18 to 39 age group overlaps with the not Cuba-born group?
Right. That is a question that that I don't know, but there is a. I mean, I can find it out. But in grouping, in creating any kind of groupings, you're going to find an overlap, and our creation of the groups is a social construct, and we create these groups, but we do it because these are accessible constituencies in a way. You know where the young people are, where the old people are, where the registered voters are. So so the answer, that's a long-winded way of saying, I don't know the answer to that question in terms of the overlap, but there is an overlap between the young and the folks born abroad. But we've been here such a long time. The Cuban American population has grown in Miami-Dade County in so many intricate ways that it's not obvious what the overlap would be. It could be a lot, it could be very little, it could be, but we haven't done that number. We could, though. Again, if you send me an email, I'm easily accessible at the Global Studies, the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies. Send me an email and ask me a question or a data question, and we'll crank it out and let you know, give details.
Okay, here's a question from Caroline McCulloch, and she writes, it's interesting that you chose to break it down by pre and post 1995 rather than 1990, the Mariel exodus. So her question is, do you find that the Marielitos, or those who came after 1980 up to 1994, have become more like the older exiles?
That's a great question. We do 1995 for a variety of reasons. Partly is that that is a cutoff where the immigration agreement was signed in 1995 that allowed for many more Cubans. For the new Miami that we know today was actually built on that agreement that has brought anywhere from 30 to 60,000 Cubans over every year until very recently. So 1995 is a natural cutoff there. Before that, the immigration was more sporadic, less regular, et cetera. But you're absolutely right in a sense that research that I've done, and I haven't cranked up this poll on that, but I have looked at research that looks at Mariel waves specifically, and I know a lot of colleagues have done it, looking at how Mariel waves remains kind of disenfranchised in a way from the success stories of the previous generations flows. And I point to work by Alejandro Portes in recent years that show that Mariels are just not as integrated in the socioeconomic bienestar, the success story. But I've noticed, and I've looked at that cohort in different polls, and there is a socialization effect going on. That maybe, yes, in 1980, the Marielitos were totally different than the previous waves. That is, they came for different reasons. They arrived in a different Miami, and et et cetera, et cetera. But the longer they've been here, it's a long time from 80 to the present. The longer they've been here, the more they've been socialized into the Miami political culture, which is ultimately an American political culture. And yes, they don't maintain their same characteristics ideologically or socioeconomically. But don't quote me on that yet until I write about it, because I'm really pulling that data together, because I think that the first blush of it gave me the questions that I now need to answer. But yes, you're very perceptive on that. Yes.
So we have a question coming in from Nora Gomez from El Nuevo Herald, and she wants to know what the sample error, although I think that's in the report.
3.1, yeah. The report's in the first slide. So 1,002 respondents. That's it's just we go for 1,000, but if people are in the middle of our interviews, when we get to 1,000, the other two people that are interviewing don't know they've reached 1,000, so they complete it. So we got 1,002.
Okay, so her second question is if you could elaborate a little bit more about the support of recent arrivals to Trump's policy and the Republican Party, and then follow-up question, how has that changed in relationship to the Obama administration?
Well, again, let's not ask too much of these numbers, but one thing that I can tell you is that during the Obama administration, if you saw that one of my last charts that showed the signing up for the Republican Party by year of arrival, during the Obama administration, new arrivals, and I won't look at the data, I'll just talk to you about it, and you can look at the data as well. New arrivals did not sign up to Republican. There was a decrease. I mean, there was a decrease in the Republican voter registrations anyway by initially substantial point, 68 to 50 something. But then it declined steadily, but still it maintained an integrity there in the high 40s. But the new arrivals weren't going into the Republican Party. I can't tell you exactly. I have a slide in there. If you go back and look at the slides, you'll be able to kind of catch one that kind of tries to grab this dynamic. This is a new phenomenon. I think it's partly because of the presence of the Republican Party. I think partly it's because, so this is just me talking impressionistically, not from the numbers per se. I think that it's the Republican Party and the Trump administration have a presence in Miami-Dade County that is it gives them it's a natural attraction to folks that have come and want to become part of the community. I mean, just to say it briefly, and I think the Republican Party allows them to become part of the community. Historically, the Republican Party has always been able to talk to Cubans a lot better than the Democratic Party. The Republican Party makes Cubans feel very important consistently throughout the years since Reagan. The Democrats don't quite have the way to do that. So if you're a new arrival and you're political and you see other young people that are political, even if you're not, I think the Republican Party's presence here is very strong. And if you want to feel empowered, coming from a place that you might feel less so, the Republican Party is here to take you in.
Okay, here's a question coming from John Suarez. And he states that prior administration's Cuba policy, I guess he refers to the Obama policy, loosened sanctions on the Castro regime. The result was the military gained greater control over the economy at the expense of cuentapropistas, or self-employed workers. Could that explain the increasing popularity of the current administration rolling back the prior policy of engagement?
Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, the thing is that, and I actually say it in the report, or Dean Stack says that one of us looks at it and kind of points out that issue that, and just to go back to the 2018 report, when the first one that we did after Trump went into the White House, Then we began to see an increase in supposedly embargo, more isolationist policies during the the first few years of Trump being in the White House. And then at that point, I did divide, and Jorge has it in his website, the populations between looking at post-1980 at that point in time, I think, and pre-1980. And I did notice, and then I compared it to the previous poll of 2016, and the question that was just asked, I'm sorry, I forgot the question asker, his name, came out real strong. That is, some people changed their minds, and it wasn't the new folks. Folks that the new arrivals and the young population still maintain their opposition to the embargo, marginal opposition. I think it was like 45% opposing the embargo. But the folks that had gone very deeply into opposing the embargo during the Obama years had changed their mind. The older guard had changed their mind. They could be because they felt maybe things weren't changing in Cuba fast enough. But I do know they changed their mind, and I don't know, I didn't go into each one of their minds to figure it out, but I think that's a good hypothesis to throw out and something that we can actually test.
So we actually have many more questions. Let's see how many of them we can address. A question by Denise Delgado, who has actually two questions. Could you expand on why non-citizens are generally more engagement-oriented? And the second one is a little more detailed. She says, the slide about diplomatic relations and embargo suggests that Cubans respond to leadership in the US, particularly during the Obama administration and now during the current administration. She wonders if it might be that leadership in Cuba also influences the Cuba diaspora's views.
On the first question, it's probably unsurprising that newer arrivals are more pro-engagement in general, because newer arrivals have left lives behind. They actually have people there. They have maybe, I mean, there are some that probably have left very disaffected, very pissed off, very frustrated, but still, you know, you have entire family lives back there, and you have entire, whether you probably don't support the government that made you your life frustrating, or the bureaucracy that you didn't like, but you still don't want to completely ignore that world because it's part of you. So I think that pro-engagement is part of the DNA of new arrivals. Now, again, once you get here, you become part of the American narrative. You become part of the American political vitriol. So how one responds to that, I think again, the Republican Party does a very good job at pulling those threads together and making it part of the party. I mean, the economy, hey, the Republican Party is the economy party. You know, if you don't have a history in the United States that gets you to explore that and a little beyond just the rhetoric, then hey, that's the party that you want to go with. So now I would say to your second question, just probably, I mean, I think that the reasons why people leave Cuba, whether the government itself influences the individuals once they get here or not, I don't know if that's precisely your question, Denise, but I would imagine that just the time you leave Cuba, and this is something that needs to be explored more deeply, is the climate of leaving has as much to do with how you feel about leaving and how you respond to your new land as the toggle of, yes, I migrated, no, I didn't migrate. So I think there's a lot to be said about looking specifically, and only an ethnography would do that, looking at how people left and how that influenced their integration into the society. But I don't know whether you have more specific concerned about how the government might influence the individuals' responses towards the embargo, for example. I don't know. I think that might be above my pay scale there. I don't quite figure out how that can be. That can happen in a way that I can put my head around it right now.
Okay, we still have quite a lot of questions and we have a lot of people listening, so that's good to know. But let's try to see if we can handle all these questions. Going back to some data points, Maribel Balbin and also Hugo de Aragon want to know if you have a gender breakdown available and if you have any idea of how the gender difference might affect the responses of the interviews.
Yeah, my bad, we all bad, because we know, yes, we have it, but we didn't report it because at some point we have to do something to narrow down the scope. So yeah, we didn't forget to ask the gender question. It's in there, but we have the data. So Maribel and Hugo, if you want to get in touch, I will gladly. Maybe we should do something, Jorge. Maybe we should do kind of a more breakdown by demographics on key issues and put it up on your website. You know, to include race, include gender, include the folks that would think some of the things that people are asking about, and we can just kind of do a quick white paper on it and put it up there, and then everybody will have an access to it. So otherwise, you can contact me directly now, and Dr. Lai and I will cook up some numbers for you. Now, let me say, this is just traditionally, because I've always looked at the gender question, and this has been a production process here where I did not break it out because we were doing other things. But Cuban women usually have been way more militant than Cuban men. They've been, you know, kind of paredón kind of types, you know. They've been very pro-embargo, and they've been, so I don't know if that's the case consistently, but I remember doing a report once. I mean, a presentation once on the older Cuba, a few years ago, Cuba Poll, and that was a finding that I had to state in very strong, stark terms, because the women were very militant, hardliner militant, and. So we don't know on this one, though. That's just an apocryphal comment on my part.
Okay, Ricardo Santos wants to know, according to the polls, has there been any change in voting tendency since 2016?
Yeah. I think in 2016, let me just kind of have a number that I have. The short answer is yes. Folks are way more Republican. And they're on the Trump bandwagon way more than they were in 2016. 2016, we did the poll about the same time. We finished in the middle of the end of August. And at that point, Donald Trump was an unknown quantity, but he had 35%. When we asked the same question of who would you vote for, Donald Trump received 35% of Cuban American votes. Hillary Clinton received 31% of Cuban American votes. And I have that number in my head because I double checked it several times. And there were a load of people that were undecided because we didn't know Trump. And the folks that knew Hillary were voted for, wanted her, but there was, anyway, for whatever reason, there were a lot of undecided. Ultimately, Trump won the state by less than 200,000 votes. I mean, it was not that much. The Cuban American votes, probably, if you look at how many they brought up, they probably brought in 100,000 votes to that total for Trump. Which is probably going to be the same for him now, by the way. I mean, I think that the 60% number was probably close to what he got in 2016. The question is how many, and let me back up, because we don't know that 60% number. What we do know, and I had a colleague and I wrote a story on Hialeah, because nobody does polls after the election. Nobody cares. It's done. The election's over. Go home. I'd love to do a poll right after the election and find out how accurate all of these polls are. But all we have is exit polls. Unless you focus in on a municipality, focus in where they actually count the votes. And the votes mean something for Cuban Americans if you're interested in Cuban Americans. In Hialeah, where the population is dominantly Cuban American, it's not 100% Cuban American, but it's dominantly Cuban American, Donald Trump won by a few hundred votes, Hialeah. So he did not overwhelm Las Urnas in Hialeah. So I think that there's a pattern. There are a lot of Latinos in Hialeah that are not Cubans, but nevertheless, you saw that that there was a support for Donald Trump, but it wasn't as overwhelming as this. So I don't know in terms of approval rating. I mean, these are solid votes. I think the fact that you had in 2016 only 35% voted for Trump, and there was said they would vote for Trump, and a huge undecided, is totally opposite now. Everybody knows that's going to vote for Trump. They know they want to vote for Trump. So that's a big change in the electorate. And it leaves a lot fewer people on the undecideds on the table for the Democrats to scoop up in the last few weeks before the elections.
Question from Taimi Arboleda, and she wants to know, what do you consider to be the most important differences between this poll and the previous one?
Well, in terms in responses, I suspect she wants to know in the answers. I think that the biggest, nothing in the poll really surprised me except the new arrivals signing up Republican. That it shouldn't have surprised me, but I was giving too little. I mean, a lot of people were saying, "Hey, this young guy is on the YouTube and he has a lot of influence and this and that," and I'm going, "Yeah, that's fine," but I didn't give the cultural impact of the younger generation's attraction to the Republican Party as much attention, perhaps, and that's what it did surprise me. Now, in big terms, again, like I said, if you look at Cubans as Republicans, the odd thing is that you have people say every 4 years, people are looking at the Latino vote and they look at Cubans and say, "Oh, look at these odd guys, oh, they're Republicans." Okay, but if you look at them as Republicans, they really are not that different from Republicans in Ohio, West Virginia, or in their support for Trump. I mean, these guys are on the Trump bandwagon, just like a lot of Republicans are. So the reality check for me is for this context was that Cuban Americans are part of the national narrative of American politics. If you have a party that is setting a certain tone, and there are certain histories within certain groups that make that party resonate. Cuba policy is one with the Cuban American population. Racism is with other groups in the United States. The Republican Party has a drum it beats, and it's very good at it. It's very focused in its approach. And the Cuban American population, I was surprised to see. I mean, upon reflection, I realized we're part of this world. We're not part of any other world. Now, so we're influenced by parties. We're influenced by American politics, American vitriol, American dysfunctions, American everything else. And we build it based on our history, on our historical background, which is migration from Cuba for whatever reason. So the most important part for me was that kind of recognition, and then seeing how important the Republican Party is becoming and has become again. And I think that historically, and Dr. Lai and I are exploring this, and Denise mentioned it, and I think she's right about this, we tend to think that Cubans shape a lot of U.S. policy towards Cuba. And I beg to differ. I think we kind of follow the leadership in Washington. And because if you look at those questions that say you want hardline sort of change regime in the Cuban government, or you want policies directed at helping the Cuban people, both get strong support. So it's a matter of, when Obama changed the rules, Cubans got, there was a certain disaffection among some groups, but we got on the bandwagon right away because we wanted to create change in a different way. There were other possibilities for change that were shut off before, and Obama opened up other possibilities for change. We might not have liked it, the Cuban government might not have responded, a variety of things, but we as Cubans responded to leadership because we still want change on the island, but now the rules are different and we'll play within those rules. What I think Trump has done, and this is the biggest difference in at least the 2016 poll to this poll, is that it has given new air to the line that it's made the rules now so the hard line is the only line that we can play. You know, we don't have access to softer ways to bring about change, and we still want to bring about change. So we're kind of stuck in the middle. So I think that the biggest surprise and the biggest change, but it wasn't a surprise, is that the biggest surprise is how much Republican we're becoming. And what's not a surprise is that we're behaving like Republicans. The Cuban American population is behaving like Republicans because that's what they are. Even, and you noticed in the 15% of Democrats say they're going to vote for Trump. Even 48%, 46% of Democrats support Trump on his economic policies, and a significant amount on a lot of other policies. So we're in different waters here, and I think that the Cuban American population is responding to the American Republican dominance, whether it's built on cards or not.
A question from Rene Hernandez. As younger generations of Cubans and Cuban Americans capture an increasingly larger share of the population, and therefore influence, what political and economic impacts, if any, do you foresee?
Well, you know, I'll look at my crystal balls here. I'll throw on my little caracoles, and I'll get back to you on that. I mean, clearly, and when I jokingly say, "Hey, they're not making any more of us, people that came before 1995," I mean, that's a significant statement because the future is in the hands of the Cuban American population. We're seen to be very committed to the South Florida area as a group, you know. So I think that there will be significant changes. I mean, I think, you know, my prediction is that if Biden gets elected and there are changes towards U.S.-Cuba relations, there'll be like, you know, we'll get upset for 20 minutes and then we'll figure out how to bring about change that way. And the Cuban American population, the young Cuban American population, will be players in that, because if we could just, this is my own personal bias, everybody wants change in Cuba. It's just how do we bring about that change? I think the Cuban American population born in the second and third generations, if they hang in there long enough with an interest in Cuba, they will have a significant impact on the transnational development of both countries. Now, there's a lot, it's a very pregnant sentence because, you know, both countries have autonomy and both countries have their own agendas. But still, I think the future is in the hands of the new Cuban American population. But let me remind you that every time, and we've done this in the last poll as well, we ask folks to rank the issues that are important to them. And Cuban Americans are always considered, every 4 years at least, to be one issue voters. People come down from both parties and they talk about Cuba, and they talk about socialism, and they talk about communism, and they kind of push our buttons, right? The reality is, when we ask these folks, and it's not just my polling, other polling has shown it as well, what what are issues are important to you? They don't respond very differently than other Republican / American / Democrats. You know, healthcare, the economy. In last in the 2018 poll, we had gun control in there, and it was higher than Cuba. We had immigration, and it's always higher than Cuba. So Cuba, yes, it's an issue. It's our culture. It's the, you know, where we come from. But it's not the only way you can talk to Cubans. You can talk to us in other ways about other things, and you should try it, Democratic Party. You should try it, because I think that we do have other issues concerned. The Republicans have figured out how to talk to Cubans. Democrats haven't quite, and it's you just got to listen. You know, listen to the people, and young people are Americans, Cubans, Americans - Cubans. They're not Cuban American. So they're learning about Cuba through family tradition and through policy and through the world around them. The first thought in the morning is not Cuba, is, you know, am I going to make it to work? Am I going to make it to school? So we've got to kind of diversify the Cuban Americanness discourse, so that Cuban Americans born here can shape it, and therefore shape the socioeconomic developments in South Florida. That's my descargo on the Cuban Americans. I think they're the future. Yeah.
I think we have more time for a couple of more questions. Let me go back to another data question, which is, I think, quite.
Well, I got to say a man about a horse at 1. It's an interview, so you got to, you know, we're looking at 12:30 here. All right. So. Yeah.
So Carlos Rodriguez again wants to know if the survey was conducted in Miami-Dade County only, or also in Broward.
Well, it's kind of South Florida-ish, because we have so many cell phone numbers involved. I would definitely Miami-Dade County. There might be somebody sitting in Hollywood Beach at the time, you know. So I'm not wrong when I say Miami-Dade County. There could be some Broward bleed over on that, but it wasn't focusing on a geographic distinction. It was focusing on identification in this geography, on being Cuban. That was the first question. Ching, you got Dr. Lai, you have any comment on that?
The sampling frame consists of all the active telephone numbers, cell phone numbers, and landlines theoretically speaking, MDC. But we do have some overflows to other counties. In the data that returned to us, we did catch some, zip codes from outside of MDC, but that's the minority. The overwhelming majority of the respondents were using a telephone active in MDC.
Thank you, and I think this will be our final question of the day, coming from Rui Ferreira. He wants to know how is this, meaning I guess the trends found in the survey, going to be reflected in local politics in terms of voting for Republican candidates? Yeah,
well, and this again, those of you out there who are actually activists or out in the streets might have a different take on it. But in general, when the voting public is, like you saw in those bars, very eager to vote, very eager to vote. That is, are you going to vote? Yes, 90%, absolutely, I'm going to vote. The down ballot impact is significant in situations where you have and when you have a personaje, right, that you're actually voting for, like Trump in the case of the Republican Party. I think there will be significant down ballot impact, and the coattails are going to be significant. I mean, how significant? I don't know. But in general, when you start putting those kinds of patterns up, like we've seen in the poll, you see a strong, the party that is, that has sown the excitement is going to benefit on the down ballot races as well. And that's probably going to happen here too.
So thank you, Dr. Grenier and Dr. Rai, for your detailed and thought-provoking presentation on the 2020 FIU Cuba Poll. Let me remind our audience that both the report and the PowerPoint presentation are available on the Cuban Research Institute's website, which is cri.fiu.edu/research. And again, thank you all for your participation and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you.
Thank you.